Today's episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook at audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 13. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different areas. Today we are joined by Pastor Jim Daub, who's the pastor of St. Paul Lutheran Church of Havelock in North Carolina. Pastor Daub, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up where you are.
Well, I am a born and raised Lutheran Church Missouri Synod member from conception through baptism through ordination. So I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and product of the Lutheran school. I don't think I've spent, in terms from kindergarten through seminary, kind of one day outside of the Lutheran school. So that is, Lutheran schools have a very dear heart to me. Went to Concordia College in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then from Ann Arbor went to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. I'm a 95 grad of Ann Arbor and a 99 grad of St. Louis. And my first parish was down at Ascension Lutheran in Castleberry, Florida. I was there for about 2.5 years and then took the call here to St. Paul Lutheran in Havelock, North Carolina. And I've been here, I just celebrated 18 years with them a couple Sundays ago.
Wonderful. Congratulations, by the way. So tell us a little bit more about North Carolina and specifically help orient us geographically. Where exactly are we in North Carolina in Havelock?
Havelock is pretty much on the eastern seaboard. We're about 2 hours southeast of Raleigh, about 2 hours northeast of Wilmington. And if you are driving from Charlotte, it's 6 hours east. If you're flying, it's less than an hour. So we're very much close to where the Outer Banks are. Most people, they're like, oh, we know the Outer Banks or we know the Appalachian Trail. The Outer Banks are a ferry ride over to the southern part of the Outer Banks, or you go up and you take a bridge over. But we're the south, kind of the southeastern corner of the state.
Okay, so tell us, what are the good things about being in that part of North Carolina? What do you like about the area?
There's a lot of really, really cool things. Like, for instance, last week it was 80 degrees and sunny. Now they're predicting for us Thursday, we're supposed to have a snowstorm. So while it's very nice to have beautiful weather during the middle of January and February, sometimes you get these little blurbs or blips in the weather with that. But there's a lot of really cool stuff to do around, in Havelock, Eastern North Carolina area, but also the state in general. North Carolina is kind of the best of both worlds. From my house, like I said, you're 6 hours drive time to the mountains. You're 20 minutes drive time to the beach. And you're about 2 hours, about hour and a half or so to the big city. So there's a lot of stuff. You can do cultural stuff and sports stuff and outdoorsy stuff and artisan type things. And just a ton of stuff is here in our state.
So there's a diversity of options and things to do, it sounds like.
Very much so. Very much so. We have anywhere from college sports to professional sports to kind of hippie colonies over in the Asheville area where they do all kinds of, craft beer, wine, whiskeys, whatever, art stuff. Around in our area directly, probably the biggest thing in our economy is the military. We have a large military base. Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point is here in Havelock. But we also have a Camp Lejeune, which is one of the largest Marine bases, is over in Jacksonville, about an hour away. But there's still a lot of other things that you can do and festivals you can go to once you do a little research and things like that.
Okay. So we've talked about the good things of the area. What are some of the things that people should be aware of as terms of the not so great things?
I think probably one of the greatest challenge is if you're trying to find a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod church home, we are kind of few and far between here. I make the joke that Havelock is the last station on, we're Fort Apache, the last station on the stop. But for me to get to another Missouri Synod church, you have to go either 1 hour to the east or 1 hour to the north. So
Wow.
there is no other Missouri Synod churches around us. I'm the circuit visitor for Circuit 13 East of the Southeastern District, and my circuit covers just over 14,000 square miles. So we have a huge circuit, and in that circuit are 9 churches. So it's like we have, I keep reminding myself, it's not like Milwaukee where you have 3 Lutheran churches, 3 Catholic churches, and 6 bars on every corner.
Yeah, throw a stone and you'll probably hit an LCMS church or something. Exactly. It's not that at all.
Exactly. No, we are very highly Baptist oriented in our area, which is sometimes a challenge because when trying to evangelize and share, some of our Lutheran teaching, is we very differ a lot from some of our Baptist friends in there. So that becomes kind of a little bit of a clutch point. If you don't like the beach, Havelock's probably not the city that you want to be at, because otherwise we're a city of around 22,000 people, and there's just not a lot of stuff that you can have right here in town unless you go out into some of the surrounding communities.
I see. So tell us a little bit more. You've already kind of opened the door with what you're experiencing with the Baptists in the area. What is it like being a Lutheran in North Carolina? What's that culturally like?
We have, interestingly, a lot of the Lutherans when they landed here, a lot of Lutherans are in the west side of the state, except most of those are ELCA Lutherans. So there's a huge ELCA kind of affiliated college, Lenore-Rhine. And Lenore-Rhine has a very big presence. There's a lot of ELCA presence over in the mountains. There's probably more Missouri Synod churches over in the center part of the state to the mountains, to the west side of the state. But for us, it becomes kind of a challenge where we are a liturgical church here at St. Paul. We follow the 3 lectionary vest every Sunday. We don't have a drum set. We don't have smoke mirrors and rockets and things. And so
the good kind of Lutheran liturgy, right?
I would have no problem with that. Correct. So some of the Baptists who come and visit they say, oh, you're just too Catholic. You're too boring. It's not exciting stuff in there. But we've also had one of the main reasons that I don't like to change the stuff, one, because I think the liturgy is a good thing, but also is a lot of the young Marines who come and visit, they say, this reminds us of home. And for their short little time that they're here, if we can give them a bit of home, then I think we're doing a good thing, and give them the solid foundation so that they can, remain firm in their faith, especially as they're working with the Marine Corps, or we've had we have a Coast Guard station down the street, working with the Coast Guards, things like that. I think as long as we can provide them a solid foundation and a home-like experience, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about this. So up here where I am in Washington State, my experience is there isn't a lot of church-going people. And that brings with it, as we talked before we started recording, certain challenges. But where you are, it sounds like there's a lot of Baptist presence. And to me, that sounds really great to have more Christians around. But what sort of challenges does it present beyond what we've already talked about the difficulties of like talking about Lutheranism and perhaps the challenges that come when they visit? What other challenges or good things are there about having that more Baptist presence?
Sure. I think probably one of the biggest things, because we're kind of the tip of the Bible Belt here, I think one of the great things is people are very open about their faith. They will say, let me pray for you. And there's been a few times where in the middle of the store, you're talking to someone and they're upset about something, and they're, instead of saying, well, I'll remember that in your prayers, they're just like, well, let me pray for you right now. And so in the middle of the grocery store, someone's having a prayer for someone else. So that's pretty cool. The amount of people you see, like in the restaurants, who pray in the restaurants is pretty cool. When I first got here 18 years ago, that I went to one of the high school Christmas concerts, and I would say 90% of the music was sacred music, and only about 10% was the Here Comes Santa Claus reindeer type stuff. So it used to be that Wednesday nights and Sundays were holy days for the people here, that you planned no other activities and things like that. Well, now over time, that culture has started to change, and Wednesday night is no longer the church night. It's no longer just the family night. It's now sports night and things like that. In my conversations with other people, it's wonderful to be able to openly talk about faith and your beliefs and asking for prayers and things. But the thing that I've noticed is that sometimes I have to make sure I choose my words properly, because sometimes the Lutheran words like justification, sanctification, are words that are so foreign to some of my Baptist or even Methodist and Presbyterian friends. And they're like, what are you talking about? So it's being able to, how do you adjust the message without changing the message, but making the message easier to understand. So I think there's some of that. I think probably the greatest struggle that we have with folks here is that it's the decision theology, that you got to turn your heart over to Jesus, that you got to find Jesus, and that give your heart to Christ and everything will be great. And the kind of the once saved, always saved kind of mentality,
I
so,
see.
so I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges. But over and all, it's nice to be in a place where you can openly talk about faith things without people getting bent out of shape.
I see. So let's transition and talk about what it's like to raise a family there. What's the atmosphere like for families?
So my wife and I have been married for about 5 years. So I got married later in life, never married previous. So we don't have any kids. We've got a golden retriever. So for us, raising a family is pretty easy because we just take her in and out. But for some of the young families, especially because of the Marine Corps, there's some connections with families in there. There are things for some, younger families to do. Where we in our area kind of have a gap is in like the junior high, senior high years. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that it just doesn't always. There's just not a lot of extra stuff for them to do if they're not in sports or school band or things like that. So consequently, some kids make some kind of poor mistakes and poor choices. But in terms of crime and things like that versus the big city, do we have crime? Absolutely. But is it on the same level as others? Not really. My wife runs the 911 center. I used to be the chaplain for the police and fire department, so I got to see a lot of those things. I've transitioned from being chaplain in the cities on the city level, that I'm now one of the auxiliary chaplains with the Coast Guard. So I'm working, a lot more with the Coast Guard people than I do with the city people any longer. But it's a nice area. A lot of Marines who have put in their 20 plus years will stay here in our area. We have what's called Naval NADEP, which is Naval Air Depot, which is basically like the Sanford and Son for the Navy. A helicopter gets damaged in war, or airplane is damaged in war. They bring it over here, they refix it, they send it back. So a lot of folks are able to work at NADEP, and then we have a lot of folks then who retire and who have stayed in the area. So it's while it's on one hand a transient community with active duty, there's also a good solid foundation of folks who have retired and who have stayed.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about North Carolina as part of the South. I know that in the Southeast there's like North Carolina isn't often considered like really south. But what's the culture like in terms of how Southern culture it is?
We we are south of the Mason-Dixon line, so any true North Carolinian will tell you that they are the South.
Okay.
And so one day I was reading something at down there's Fort Macon, which is about 22 miles from here. It's right along our beach. It's an old fort that used to be used in the Spanish American War. They used it during World War One, World War Two, through some other things. And I'm reading this thing about this, this war between the states, and I never heard that phrase before. And so I call up a friend of mine. And I'm like, help me understand, what is this war between the states thing? She goes, well, you dummy. She goes, that's the Civil War. I'm like, oh, well, why did they call it the Civil War? And so when I hung up the phone, this docent comes over and she says, young man, you're not from around here, are you? And I said, no, I was born and raised in Milwaukee. And she goes, well, we don't like to call it the Civil War because the war of Northern aggression was not very civil. And I'm like, oh, okay, so in some aspects, there's still the belief that the South is going to rise again. But there's been a lot of kind of changeover. For a while, North Carolina has been called the halfback state. And someone's like, what's a halfback? It's all the folks who moved from New York and New Jersey down to Florida. But Florida got to be too hot for them. So they moved halfway back home, which was North Carolina. And because the property tax is cheap, the property itself is cheap, and the weather is nice, depending on the area, you pretty much can get 4 seasons or 2 seasons, whichever you like. So you're halfway back home. But some of the pure Southerners are just like, oh, those Yankees, if they would just go all the way back, But so there is some of that sense of, Southern, not Southern superiority, but there is a lot of Southern pride, exactly. There is some great, the folks have been really, really good to me. A lot of the folks who have lived here a long time have reached out to me and have kind of taken me under their wing. I'm now considered one of those damn Yankees, a Yankee who's moved down to stay. But I remind them, I'm like, I'm a Midwesterner. We didn't join the war until like 2 weeks before it was done in Wisconsin. I know that's not like the exact date, but, sure. And so they're like, well, okay, well, we can let you stay, so. But
I see.
But it is it's very interesting. It's cross cultural in terms of mix of white, black, Hispanic, immigrants from other areas. It's also very cross-political. You have some areas that are dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, but then also some areas that are dyed-in-the-wool Republican. So it's not like you could say North Carolina fits one peg into the big thing. There's so many different places that the pockets of places can fit in.
Yeah, I think it's very easy from the outside looking at the Southeast to think of it as a monoculture, but it's not like that at all, right? As you were just saying, it's very different, very diverse in different areas, and you'll find all sorts of things there, yeah?
Exactly. There's, in terms of like, the economy wise, you are vast and few. You've got pharmaceutical companies, you have a lot of research companies, medical, technical, a lot of colleges and universities. You've got just regular manufacturing. NADEP here at Cherry Point is the largest employer east of I-95. I-95 is kind of the north and south thoroughway on the east side of our state. And we average around $22 billion a year in economy there. So, you have a whole lot of influences with things like that. not everyone in the South. That there's always the opinion that, oh, people in the South are uneducated, they have no teeth, they live in mobile homes, they speak real slow. While there are a few who fit the stereotype, there really are some very fantastic people and very genteel people in there as well.
Certainly, yeah. It's really strange and pretty unfortunate that in recent years, or maybe in the last, well, I'm not sure exactly how long this has been going on, but that kind of Southern stereotype of like, oh, Southerners are backward and stupid and all these things, and it's really unfortunate that people think that way, just because, as you were saying, there are some great people. There are great people there, and it's more than just that kind of banjo stereotype,
Exactly,
if that
exactly.
was ever accurate in the first place.
Well, there are some parts, believe it or not. When I go to one of the churches that's in my circuit as circuit visitor, there's a few communities that I drive through that probably the theme song from Deliverance could probably fit very well.
Okay.
You're like, oh my goodness. But then there's other parts in there where some of the homes are some of the most beautiful homes that you will ever see. And the property is absolutely gorgeous and well kept. And, so it really is such a microcosm of people. Tobacco in our area, kind of on the eastern side of North Carolina, tobacco used to be king. But now, interestingly, a lot of the tobacco farmers are being bought out by the government, and they're making the stevia. So if you ever see those green packets of like sweetener, the stevia takes the same nutrients that tobacco takes. So they're now switching their fields over to stevia fields. And so they got the benefit of the government buyout, but now they're still able to grow crops in their land without having to change over all of the nutrients for the land. So, the farmers were pretty smart with that one, but we still have a huge, cotton industry over in this area. Stevia, tobacco is still very much grown in our area. And soybeans and peanuts and all that kind of stuff. And so, but it's just interesting how the farmers were very wise that they saw this coming. They knew that there was going to be something issue, but of how that one plant takes the same nutrients, so they didn't have to worry about any kind of issues with their farms.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. If you're listening to this podcast on the go, you know the power of having audio in your ears. And Audible wants to put the great books that you would like to listen to there as well, with their free 30-day trial of their service that comes with a free audiobook. So if you're looking for a book to check out, to try it out, I would recommend Martin Luther's Table Talk, 7 Hours of the Wit and Wisdom of Martin Luther. But if you're not interested in Table Talk, they have a wide variety to choose from beyond Table Talk. So check it out at audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. Let's get back to the show. So let's transition to one of my favorite parts of the podcast, where we talk about things in your area that are highlights, either a restaurant or two, maybe activities that are really great. If somebody's visiting, what would you recommend they see?
But here in Havelock, the first thing I would encourage anyone to do in Havelock is and it's actually less than a half a mile down the street from the church. Our church is located right on Highway 70, which Highway 70 is the major thoroughfare that brings you down to the beach. Highway 70, right off of there is the Havelock Tourist and Event Center. And in there, it shows a whole lot of history of where the military kind of came from and where they are, especially with relation with the Marine Corps. But there's also a whole room that shows like kind of what it was like during Civil War time. We were a big station here. There was a big fort here in Havelock. General Havelock came from Britain as part of the things, part of the war and the fighting and all that kind of stuff. And so it's very interesting of how they have that all set up. One of the things that Havelock used to be famous for, but we don't have a museum for it, is that we were one of the best producers of moonshine. And actually,
Oh,
Babe Ruth would come from New York on his way to Florida and come here to Havelock to a hunting camp to do some hunting and fishing, but also to load up on moonshine when he went down to a spring training. So there's a book by a local author, Eddie Ellis, and Eddie Ellis has the whole history of our area, which is absolutely fantastic. So that book is a good resource. But just north of us, about 15 miles, is the city of New Bern. New Bern, North Carolina, was the first governor's palace was there for the colony of North Carolina. And so President George Washington stayed there, and I think it was a few weeks after he stayed there, the palace burned down. Well, they rebuilt the palace using the original blueprints, and so now they have all kinds of activities throughout the summer. Some of the homes there go back to the early 1700s, and so they have those as part of the historical area. One of the things that is New Bern is famous for is Pepsi-Cola was invented in New Bern, North Carolina, in a little Bradford was his last name, and he ran the little pharmacy across the street from the big Episcopal church. And so the kind of the rumor is if you rearrange the words of Pepsi-Cola, the letters of Pepsi-Cola, it actually spells out the word Episcopal. And so some people try to make it of, oh, well, he was looking at the Episcopal Church and now he made that. Well, they can't really prove that for sure, but it's a nice kind of live tale in there. But
interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's, so if you ask people for Coke down here, they kind of look at you a little cockeyed because this is Pepsi country here. So if you don't like Pepsi, make sure you load up on Coke at the grocery store. Because most of the restaurants are all Pepsi restaurants in there. But Christ Episcopal Church is the oldest Episcopal church here in North Carolina. And actually in the very front, they have from, I believe it's King George, they have communion vessels that King George gave them as when they first began their church. So there's a lot of really cool history things. I mentioned earlier that down at Fort Macon, which is down in, Fort Macon is down in, just off of Atlantic Beach. Fort Macon is the fort, it's free, you can go through there. Also down along what we call the, kind of the Crystal Coast, which is Atlantic Beach, Pine Knoll Shores, Indian Beach, Emerald Isle. It's one of the barrier islands that are like the Outer Banks barrier islands, but it's right here off of our coast. There's a huge aquarium there that you can go see. There's a whole bunch of other little museum type things that they have. The city of Beaufort, North Carolina, which is about 20 miles away, but it's not exactly on the ocean, it's on the inlet. They have, that's where Blackbeard, the pirate, used to come and stay. And they actually found his boat, Queen Anne's Revenge, right off the shore of that area. There's a huge cemetery in the Methodist church that you can go through, and they actually have a walking tour that takes you through the different parts and shows you these special graves and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of really, really neat stuff to do around here. You can go down to Wilmington, which is about 2 hours, and they have the USS North Carolina, one of the big, large aircraft carrier. There's a whole bunch of military museums and things like that. So it's not just some sleepy place to do, or if you just want to hang out at a rental place on the beach and watch the waves for a week, hey, you can do that too.
Good deal. So as we start closing out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the opportunity, Pastor Daub, to go ahead and tell our listeners about anything that you would like to promote, whether it's your church website, places people can follow your work online. What would you like to tell our listeners about?
Well, we have our church website. It is www.stpaulhavelock, HAVELOCK.com. We're in the process right now of kind of switching over our website, so it's kind of it's not the most glorious right now, but we're working on that. But you can also find us on Facebook, St. Paul Lutheran Church LCMS, and that I post up my sermons almost every week. I'm a little bit behind. That's my catch up day today to get some of the sermons in there. And then we invite anyone. If you're coming here for looking for a place for the summertime to come down, this is a wonderful vacation spot. The first weekend in May, in case anyone is interested, is the Marine Corps Air Station Air Show. It'll be featuring the Blue Angels. The nice thing is it's completely free for parking, free for admission. Now, of course, you can spend a whole lot of money on food and T-shirts and plastic planes and blow-up planes and all that kind of stuff. But it really is a great opportunity to make a weekend out of it. They have a night show on Friday, shows all day on Saturday and Sunday. And then you're welcome to join us. Our worship service is a traditional Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod worship service every Sunday at 9 a.m. And we have adult Bible class and Sunday school for all ages at 10:30 a.m. And of course, Lutherans have to eat, so we have some kind of fellowship time in between with usually some pretty good snacks and treats during that time. So if you're ever in the area, you're more than welcome to come check us out.
Wonderful. Thank you again for your time today. Before we say goodbye, what are your closing thoughts for our listeners?
My encouragement is that when you travel, continue to find a church home. Sometimes it's nice to be in a different spot, to hear a different preacher. Sometimes you hear preachers and you're like, wow, really? And that really makes you appreciate your pastor. And then you can go home and give your pastor a huge hug and say, hey, we really appreciate you. And, but also it allows you to worship with the saints in different locations and be able to gather together, to hear God's word, to receive his gifts, and to be able to have the fellowship with brothers and sisters in the faith. I know the Missouri Synod webpage has the church locator. They also have it through the mobile. You can get it on your mobile phone. But also sometimes double check, though, to call the church and make sure to see what their times are. I know for a while there was a little disconnect for us of having to get things caught up on the Missouri Synod page versus ours. But, check out a church, look them up on Facebook, look them up on the website, and, give a call. And my encouragement, go to church, be in God's house, but also enjoy a new locale that you perhaps have never been to before.
All righty. That's good advice. Thank you again for your time today. God's peace.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, including links to all the cool stuff that we heard about from Pastor Daub, go to the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/13. I also encourage you to check out that Audible offer at audibletrial.com/LutheranCartographer. And last, please subscribe to the show on Stitcher or on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review as well. That helps the show be seen and heard by more people. So until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.